Hello and welcome back to the Comic Literate podcast, the podcast that does deep dives into the best of comic books, graphic novels, mangas, and I'm not doing this for a second time. I'm your host, the soon-to-be known as Comic Stan, and with me as always is my unruffled co-host, it's Jamie.
Well, now I am rockin' ruffled. Rockin' ruffled?
We're both a bit rockin' ruffled right now. It sounds like if you're going to, what's the American thing? The rat, the animatronic thing in America, the Five Nights is based on.
Chuck E. Cheese.
Chuck E. Cheese. And we've got his friend, Rockin' Ruffled the rat over here.
Rockin' Ruffle on the bass.
Yes. And as I was explaining before we realized that there was an audio issue, the unruffled comes from me trying to connect it to today's title. So I took we're doing Scott Pilgrim, first part two of the podcast.
Hey, in line, klaxon sounds,
and all that.
Selector.
Yes, in line with the cartoon that's coming out soon, which we'll talk about.
Don't tell them.
No, but we're promoting it.
They need to think that we are completely unscrupulous, that we have perfect integrity. It's not like, oh, there's a thing coming out on Netflix. Do you want to do more Scott Pilgrim?
We just happened to do like Ms. Marvel when the Marvels were coming out and all those other ones.
We just happen to do all the things we do in the order we do them in, and there's no other reason than that we just think it's really good for our integrity.
I do like to imagine if I'd never revealed this to you, that one day you would have been like, did you realize that Scott Pilgrim thing was coming out when we were doing the Scott Pilgrim episode?
I mean, the funny thing is that you often tell me that we're doing these things for a reason, and then, remember yet last week, I got halfway through the Ms. Marvel episode and went, I should make a film out of this, and you were like, Jamie, we're doing this because they're making a TV show. It's already made. You can watch it. And I was like, oh, great, cool.
I can't tell whether you'd be a great magician's audience or not. Because on the one hand, I could imagine someone being like, and look what's in your hand. And you'd be like, oh, wow, when did this go? Not remembering they gave it to you earlier. But on the other hand, I could also imagine them being like, is this your card? And you being like, I don't know, mate, I forgot.
The funny thing is that in many ways, I'm incredibly observant.
It's the ADHD, right? Isn't it? It's
yeah.
When you're focused, you're laser focused, but that focus is like on like a 10-20% like kicking in rate.
Yeah, I can maintain focus for about 180%, like 10% of the time. Although, like, I will have conversations with people, and I will have to hold back I will have to hold back a good proportion of what I remember about them from the last time we spoke, because it weirds people out. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, because your dad was in XYZ and he did that, didn't he? And they go, how do you know that? And I'm like, you told me the last time we spoke. And they don't remember telling me, and so then I look mental. I
think that's actually going to be somewhat of a topic coming up later in this episode. But coming back to it, the reason for the Unruffled was I literally took the titles of the volumes of Scott Pilgrim we're covering this week, and one of them being Scott Pilgrim Gets It Together. And I was like, clasping at straws, but let's see if the adjectives for someone who has it all together. And it was unruffled. So I was like, you know what? That's the most interesting of the ones I could find. Because the other ones were like, you know, like organized and stuff. I was like, that's boring. It's like unruffled. Like, that's an interesting one.
I mean, I'm often pretty ruffled, in fairness.
Physically, yes. But mentally also yes. So I see your point.
I'm unfazed by a lot of things, but
yes.
I am quite a like, ooh, what's going on, chaotic human being.
Would you say you're whelmed, or is that a thing?
I'm often overwhelmed, mate, but I think that's just because I'm a human being existing in 2023 with a mortgage.
I think it's a kind of running, like, not literary joke, but like language-based joke in the English language. Like, you could be overwhelmed or underwhelmed, but you can never just be whelmed. Like, I feel like I've heard that before.
Yes. Yes.
Cutting to the English language master over here, is whelmed a word, and what does it mean?
Whelmed is not a word.
Wow. So how did we get to underwhelmed?
Do you know, I used to know this and I don't. So at some point...
This is the one thing you're good for.
Do you want me to get the fucking dictionary out again? Do you want me to get the dictionary out again? I will do it.
We're literally going to develop a dictionary corner part of the podcast, which, for our non-British, that's a countdown reference.
It's a countdown reference.
Yes.
Countdown is a British TV show where they do word and number puzzles.
It's a real nerds TV show.
And then there'd be somebody whose job it was to read a dictionary.
As a punishment. Have you got to the D's yet? Like,
so you know Carol Vorderman, who used to be on that show?
She was the original, wasn't she?
Yeah. Do you know she had like a master's degree in mathematics? She was a deeply intelligent person.
Anyone who's had that role has to, because they literally solve like ridiculous equations with the numbers the contestants have chosen.
I'm pretty sure they now have an earpiece and a bloke with a calculator.
Ooh, that's...
But back in the day, Carol Vord, so they would give you 9 random numbers and then a number you had to reach, and you had to do a series of math sums to get to the target number. And Carol Vorderman would just nail it every single time in her head whilst also presenting a TV show. Fucking well impressive.
I say, for any non-British listeners, if you want to experience this but you think it might be a bit boring, there's a 8 out of 10 Cats version of it.
Which 8 out of 10 Cats is a British comedy panel show, so it's a bunch of comedians playing Countdown, and it is very good.
And Rip Sean Locke, who made it what it was.
Oh yeah, no, I was literally about to say, get an episode with Sean Locke, R.I.P. And yeah, no, because he was really funny on it.
And if you have the time, look up Carrot in a Box. If you've seen it.
Just don't.
Yeah, do. It's the best.
Ugh, yeah, fine.
It's Sean Locke's proudest moment. It was when he died. That clip was everywhere, and everyone was like, "Miss him so much." It's like him just absolute. I won't give away, but it's a pretty good clip, and you'll want to play Carrot in the Box at home with your loved ones, and that's not a euphemism.
He made me quiet laugh.
That's the worst kind for a podcast. So,
onto the comic.
We are doing, as I said, the next 2 volumes. So somehow, I had a little bit of a list on the last episode, which was annoying because it was within our first 10 episodes when we weren't as good as we are now.
Just how bad was it?
I mean, I was a bit like, come on, get to the point. Because now we just laser focus on the point. We don't tangent at all.
We used to do a solid half hour of bollocks leading into actually talking about the comic, didn't we?
Whereas now we've divided that bollocks and sprinkled it over the course of the episode.
We pepper.
Yes.
Like a good steak, we pepper our episode with bollocks.
It's the frog in the boiling pot of water. Like we don't splash you straight in because you'll jump out. But if we slowly get you in the cool water, and then we slowly turn up the bollocks, and then by the end you go, they didn't talk about the comic at all. Like, which is how we want to trick the audience.
But I've had it on good authority, man. The people want more tangents.
I mean, again, how can we fit more in? We will find out in this week's episode. But somehow, listening back to it, we did 3 full volumes, and I didn't realize how long that was. And we spoke very briefly off air, interpreting how long those actual volumes were.
Yeah.
For me, a volume of Scott Pilgrim feels a lot longer because it's not marked with the issue. Like,
it is marked with chapter numbers, though.
Yeah, but they're not the same as like when you finish an issue, you literally get like the page, like the end here's next week's, and then you start the next one. And
no, it is presented as one long ongoing story, isn't it?
Because like chapter marks in a book, I feel the same problem is who decides how long a chapter is?
The author.
Exactly. But so one chapter could be tiny and the next chapter could be bloody Order of the Phoenix. Like,
so most authors will have roughly consistent chapter length.
They should, and I assume most of them do uphold that. But
yes,
it's one of those, like, we don't enforce it as a law, but it's like one of those good faith things. Like, don't do 1-page chapter unless you're being a dick. You know?
Some authors do.
That's what I mean. So it's not clear cut across the board. And I didn't know if it was the same thing with these kind of chapters. Like, obviously, bring up the name just in case.
Bryan K. O'Malley.
Not K. You got that wrong last time as well.
Oh, is he just?
That's why I was bringing it up. It is Bryan Lee O'Malley.
Bryan Lee O'Malley. I always get him mixed up with Brian K. Vaughan. Right, the cat has found some chocolate buttons. She's very excited.
And that's the worst thing she could find.
Well, no, they won't. They only kill dogs. They don't kill cats.
I always get that confused. I always just assume cats and dogs are similar enough.
Don't get me wrong. I don't feed her chocolate.
It's still bad. It's not as bad.
I'm not like, you've been a good girl. Here's some dairy milk.
But so I don't know. Bryan Lee O'Malley, he might just be like, yeah, this seems like a chapter. And contextually, it might fit the, narrative of like, this seems like a chapter point, but it might literally be a page or two long, and the next one might be 100 pages.
The chapter breaks in this are consistent.
What I mean is, it didn't help for me. It didn't break up enough for me as when I'm reading, like, if I read 10 issues if a volume is like 10 issues of something, I get that feeling of like, buddy, I've got through like 3 issues already. I've only got 7 left, and like, that kind of thing.
You do the thing that anybody doing any kind of boring labor does, which is that you divide it. You divide and subdivide.
Yeah.
There's this really beautiful part of Mort where Terry Pratchett goes into it. Mort is digging out shit from a stable, and he says he does this thing where he goes, right, I've done 3 feet. If I do one more feat, that means I'm halfway to the halfway point, which means I've done about a third.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing that I do when I'm reading a boring comic book. I'm like, right, I'm on my third issue, which means I've only got 7 left. But because the next one's 4, it only really feels like 6. So actually, I'm halfway through.
I should clarify, I was not bored reading this comic.
No, it's great.
No. But it did still feel like a longer time had passed while trying to get through a volume.
I think I smashed out the 2 volumes we did for this episode in like an hour and a half.
I think at least an hour a volume for me.
I'd read this before, though, hadn't I?
Yes.
I believe I've even read this twice before, because I read the original once and then I read the colorized version once.
And I feel like I might have skimmed a little bit more in the first couple volumes because they're so close to the film.
Yeah.
So I was going through panels like, this is the same dialogue that I got. Whereas now we are entering the point where the films had to really, really condense this stuff to fit it in. Whereas obviously these are 2 whole volumes. So the main point I'm making is in that first episode we did the 3 volumes. And I went, bloody hell, we did 3 volumes. And then I initially was going to be like, let's do the other 3 now. And then I did the first 2. And I was like, you know what? I've got like 2 pages of notes. This will do. And also we're holding something back in case another Scott Pilgrim associated thing happens.
We're holding back the ending. We're
Exactly.
not doing that. And to be honest with you, last time we did 3 issues. This time we're doing 2. We're just saving that one little volume at the end.
Yep. And it's a big one, apparently, from what I've seen in the blurb.
The 6th one is as long as 4th and 5th combined.
That's even better reason to stop at 4 and 5.
Because it would have taken you 4 hours.
But like I said, we're doing Scott Pilgrim Gets It Together and Scott Pilgrim versus the Universe. Both great titles I think they could have used for the film. But I did make a note. At one point, I did skim the 3rd volume just to be like, what happened last time? And that one is Scott Pilgrim, The Infinite Sadness. I was like, imagine the balls if they had like gone with that as the film title. People would be like, this is a Michael Cera film. Why is it sad?
I think he subtitled them all really well.
Yeah, they're interesting. Like they're vague enough that you don't like. I feel like you could mix them up, and they could go in a. You could mix up the volume titles, and they would apply to a lot of them. Except maybe the last one, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it's a bit more specific. But they do all fit the overall story across all the volumes. So they all fit.
Yeah,
that
they're all
narrative.
consistent, aren't they?
Yeah, and as I said, Bryan Lee O'Malley. I thought. Because I assume you were as well reading the colorized versions.
Yes.
I think it's worth knowing it because I think that's most likely going to be the copy that someone at home might be reading as well.
Yeah.
So that was colored by Nathan Fairbairn or Fairbarn.
We'll go Fairbairn.
It's fair and then it's barn but with an I.
Yeah, Fairbairn.
Exactly. And the reason I'm making a point of that is I probably butchered some non-Western names before. This is evidence of I can also butcher Western names because I'm just bad at interpreting the symbols of English language.
Can't read the runes.
Exactly. They are confusing to me and I'm not even dyslexic.
Are you not?
I mean, I don't think I've never been personally, I've never been tested, so who knows. But yeah, colorized versions, picking up where we left off, which was they just done the 3rd Evil X. Yeah. So we are now at 4, 5, and 6 technically across volumes 4 and 5.
Yeah.
And what's interesting here is, again, like I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people have seen the film without reading the original comic book. This is where it diverts the most from the film.
Yeah, because the film doesn't cover all 6 volumes, but it kind of does. So we meet Gideon we've only just really gotten a look at Gideon. And I think this is where some of the most interesting content in the series starts to creep in.
This is, I think, the deepest stuff.
Yeah.
And I can also completely understand why they had to take it out for the film because they had like a shorter narrative that still serviced the overall theme, but they couldn't quite get into like the Scott and Ramona moving in together and a quite nuanced display of that in this book. I think that's one of the strong points of these volumes.
There's something that I want to just get off my chest right at the top of the episode.
We're doing straight in, all spoilers and everything.
Yeah,
all
fuck
that.
it. This is like 20 years old or something.
People still go, thanks for spoiling the 6th Sense for me.
Yeah.
People do that.
I have to address some good old-fashioned early 2000s homophobia.
I was going with ableist stuff, actually. That's why I made the notes
Right, okay, cool. So we've got a few little things that
I'm actually surprised that there's homophobia because I didn't pick up on it, and I'm interested to hear what you have.
Nuanced. It's nuanced homophobia.
Okay.
So there is a point at which we have a revelation that Romana Flowers has had a relationship with a woman.
Yes, I know where you're going now, yeah.
And Scott's response to that is, "You had a sexy face?" His exact words.
Yeah.
And then he, quote unquote, shivers with delight.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, I think that feeds really strongly into the over-sexualization of queer people.
Yeah.
The idea that...
Especially lesbians.
Yeah, the idea that because somebody isn't straight, that speaks to the way that they practice their sexuality and not just whom they practice it with. And so the idea that Romana's gay-queer relationship was a sexy phase, I just think is inherently a bit homophobic. And then also we see Knives Chow and Kim making out in a room, and I think Scott's response to that is much different as if he'd seen two characters of the opposite gender doing that.
See, I did wonder that, because my thinking with that specifically was I genuinely didn't know, and I think you could go either way, whether his reaction was based on two friends who you didn't know liked each other at all, and seeing suddenly an intimate moment between them, versus, as you say, the other option is equally that, we don't see any other examples of two friends suddenly getting together. The only one I could think of was young Neil and Knives.
Yeah.
But I think that's more like they turn up to a public place like, we are together now.
Knives is brilliant because she's worked her way through that friendship group.
Yeah.
Because she's with Scott, and then she's with young Neil, and then it's her in the room making out with Kim. And then a bit later on, they walk into...
There's some closest with her and Stephen Stiles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which hasn't paid off yet, but might be something.
Young Neil's arc is sad.
Yeah, it's a real background, like, C plot, isn't it?
Yeah, like we just see him, like, alone in the dark, chain-smoking cigs in his room, looking miserable. That's not fun.
Yeah. But yeah, like I said, we don't see any moments of him like suddenly seeing two other friends making out.
Yeah.
So we don't, with that one, again, I think you could go either way. Like,
oh, it's entirely possible, but I just wanted to reference it. Where was the ableism? Because that flew over my radar, mate.
It was just particular slurs, like, used quite a few times.
Oh, they used the R slur.
Did you not see that?
No, who says it?
Like, a bunch of them.
Really?
Yeah, like normally directed towards Scott. I mean, for how it was used at the time, like, I get it, but yeah, it's very 2003. Like that's how I view all this stuff. Same with the point we made in Invincible a few weeks ago.
Yeah,
it's so of its time. You are balancing that, like, they are accurately capturing the representation of this age group in that period of time.
Yes, they are.
So, but yeah, like we always say, it's still worth calling out, not to demonize the writer for writing it 20 years ago, but just to be like, that's not okay now, though.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
That's all we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of context, isn't it? And I feel like it's becoming boring that we keep talking about it because we keep having the same conversation of like, about context and the way that culture changes and all of that kind of stuff.
Well, we have to because we're beta soy boy cucks, aren't we? So
yeah, liberal beta soy boy cucks.
Wait, you're liberal? This podcast is over. Can't believe this.
You wait until you find out how I vote, mate.
Monster raving loony pie.
All the time, every time. Every time.
Lord Buckethead. He's the only one who's going
monster.
He's the only one who's going to get the job done. I don't know what the job is, but
he knows what the job is.
He's the wild card.
It's like when Donald Trump got into office. I imagine there was a moment where he was sat in the Oval Office and went, fuck, I've actually got to do this now.
You know who thought for sure that he wasn't going to win?
Him.
The South Park makers.
Yes.
They were making this. They were making the series at the time, and famously, they make their episodes about like. They start it a week before it comes out.
Yeah.
They had a documentary about it. I think it's called 7 Days in Hell. And it literally shows like conception of the idea of the episode to recording it and animating it and releasing it. And they've got it close to the wire a couple times. For years, there's one instance where they didn't get it on time. And that was just because like something happened out of their control and they just couldn't make the episode ready. So Comedy Central, I think they just ran a rerun. They said, this week's episode will be out next week, and it's just going to be delayed all a week.
Yeah.
But so they were making that series at the time, and it was about the election and everything. And you can tell the episode after Trump wins, it's really scattershot. And like they said afterwards, they're like, we thought Hillary was going to. I don't know for sure if they admitted this or not, or if it's just a strong theory based on the episodes. but the episodes were gearing towards Trump losing because their character, Mr. Garrison, was Trump. He was the Trump character. So after he wins, he does exactly that. He's like, I didn't think I was actually going to win. So it's theorized that they
was
were
he Mr. Garrison at the time, or was he Mrs. Garrison yet?
He was Mr. Garrison again.
Again?
Yeah. He's been...
Did they detransition Mr. Garrison?
Yes.
That's hilarious.
Mr. Garrison has been everything, both gender and sexuality. He had literally gone across everything. But yeah, so I thought that was interesting that they were like, oh shit, Trump has won. We have to redo the episode that's coming out. And it kind of ruined their plot because they were doing an overarching series plot. So it was going to result in a culmination at the end of the series. And then a few series after that, they were like, we're going to stop this series-long plot because it's too difficult. Don't know how we got on that from Scott Pilgrim, but...
Yeah, fuck it.
Monster Evolutionary Pie, it made sense at the time.
Oh, we were talking about me being liberal.
Yes.
There you go.
So yeah, a couple of 2003 language in this, so if that's an issue for anyone if you're going to read this, you've probably already... if you're going to read these volumes, you've probably read the volumes beforehand, so you know what you're in for, really. I think it does somewhat speak to... We've said before that if a character does stuff like this in a comic book or any kind of media, what really is important is how that character is being portrayed. If that character is like the squeaky clean protagonist who everyone's meant to love, and they start using this kind of language, then it becomes like you're kind of okaying it in a way. But equally, if you had a bad character and they say bad shit, then it's like, well, yeah, that they are meant to be the bad person in this. So for this, I think Scott does kind of veer on the unsympathetic protagonist. I
mean, yeah, we talked about this in the first episode, I believe. Scott isn't a particularly sympathetic protagonist. Particularly, there's things that he did in this issue, in the first run, which come to fruition in this run. So everybody sort of finds out that he cheated on Ramona with knives.
Yeah.
Cheated on knives with Ramona.
And that's something that's never quite addressed in the film, so...
No, absolutely not. And he kind of gets sold out by his friend. But it's also kind of valid that Stephen did that. I don't think it's unreasonable.
Well, I think the point that Stephen was making was he was annoyed that things kept seeming to work out for Scott despite his many flaws. So I think he felt a bit of you know what, this isn't on. It's not going to be all okay for him because he has done bad shit.
And the overwhelming sense that you get from Scott's relationships, particularly in Volume 4, is that his friends don't really like him that much.
Well, so reading it, I was making a few points of why I didn't like Scott or things he was doing that I didn't like.
Yeah.
And then when his friends started to reflect my views, I felt as a reader justified and more
vindicated.
Not quite vindicated, but felt more engaged in the actual story because I think I was taken out a bit by Scott constantly fucking up and nothing happening. But when the repercussions did happen, I was like, oh, I'm in now because the realism then brought me back in.
And it's kind of it has that... We talk about things being Whedon-esque a lot, don't we? But it has that Whedon-esque thing where all of these characters are really unlikable in many different ways. But then you remember, they're all in their early 20s. People are unlikable in their early 20s.
The thing with that Whedon-esque language is when it's just done in place of normal language, that's when it becomes annoying, when things become overly quippy.
Yeah.
In this, I feel like people's detachedness, the characters, they're too cool to care about stuff.
Yeah.
That is now actually reverberating across the characters. So they're actually rebounding off each other and falling out and things like that. So that actually is the best version of a Whedon-esque quippiness for me. It's these characters being shitty to each other. It's actually justified using that, if that makes sense.
And I think in this volume you get a real sense of Scott's self-absorption. So Kim has this boyfriend for a bit, and we only really see him really occasionally because we only see him from Scott's perspective.
Yeah.
And Scott never remembers him. And then we get to a point where they're like, oh, were you dating that guy? And Kim was like, yes, of course I was. And you've met him multiple times, and every time you made the same observation about his name and you never realised him. And Scott's takeaway from it was, I knew someone with a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Scott was
how it benefited him.
Yeah, Scott was just thinking about how it could have benefited him had he been a little bit more engaged with his friend in her life.
And this is what I was saying before when you said about remembering facts about people. I was like, this is the complete opposite of Scott Pilgrim, who just completely forgets everyone. And at one point, this stretched my believability a little bit. He forgot he had a brother.
Yeah, massively. Yeah.
That's why I was like, what? Is this a meta joke or what's going on here?
And it's the brother whose base had broken.
Yeah.
He'd just smashed up his Ricky.
Yeah, and exactly. That was I was like, why is this happening? Is this meant to be like a larger thing, or
just as a little thing here? I don't know if I talked about the instruments that they use in the first one, and obviously there's a running joke over these two volumes that they're not playing gigs anymore because Steven's making the album. But that Rickenbacker, that's a 4001 bass. So it's the same thing that Paul McCartney used in like the later Beatles era, sort of like White Album, Abbey Road kind of era.
Sure.
It's an incredibly expensive instrument.
Right. So him breaking it should have had even more impact.
Yeah, like we're talking like 2,000 US roughly. Rickenbacker, because of their manufacturing processes, the chemicals they use are only allowed to make stuff for so much of the year. They're not allowed to produce stuff all year round. So there's a massive scarcity of Rickenbackers. Like, they're really highly sought after by Beatles fans. They're quite rare instruments. They're really interesting instruments. And Scott had borrowed his brother's bass on a long-term loan for many years and then smashed the neck off it and just handed it back to him in a case. What a bell end.
See,
his own brother?
I think for me and probably most casual readers, I mean, casual readers in the sense we don't know about the instruments.
Yeah.
I think we all just took more of the sentimental value of the bass breaking. But what's also interesting is now that I think about it, the sentimentality is meant to be like, again, referencing the film, his being in a band is a big part of his identity.
Yeah.
But in these volumes, he's like, oh, are we not gigging right now? Like, just, he could take or leave being a band. It's only when someone else is like, hey, when you guys in the band, it's like, yeah, we should probably gig or something soon.
Yeah, like Kim talks about the lack of structure in her life now that she's not playing.
Yeah, and that seems more like part of her identity almost.
Yeah. Kim says, I used to drum 3 times a week and now I have no structure. And so these things, and again, it's just part of that vein of Scott not being particularly present in the lives of the people around him. Even in Ramona's life.
Yeah.
There's 2 scenes over the 2 volumes. There's 2 scenes in volume 5 where Ramona is getting ready in the morning and she's listing off all the things that she's going to do that day. And she's like, I'm going to go run all these errands, blah, 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 blah. And you and I both know that when you're in a relationship and one of you has to go run a bunch of errands, the other one goes. Like, you go and run errands together. That's the thing you do together as a couple. And Scott's like, there's one time where Scott's one job for the day is to empty the dishwasher. And he just spends the entire day playing games on her phone.
Was he actually... So I was a bit confused by this point. Was he actually playing games on the phone, or was he staring at the message on Ramona's phone from Gideon?
It wasn't a message from Gideon. It was a letter that she wrote to Gideon.
Yeah, so was he staring at that the entire time? Because that's what I think I got from it. But then after she says, oh, were you playing games again? I wasn't sure. I don't... But like, either way, he has like... I genuinely made a note when she said... oh, can you empty the dishwasher? I literally made no. I said, I don't think he's going to empty the dishwasher.
No, and of course he did.
And then he didn't. But yeah, I made notes exactly like that of like
that
how
dishwasher that dishwasher was a loaded Chekhov's gun.
Yes, exactly. Mention the dishwasher, but it's the opposite where it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But that's the point.
But it's because it's Scott Pilgrim.
Exactly. Scott Pilgrim is the anti-Chekhov. If you tell him to do something, he won't do. If it gets mentioned, it won't be addressed.
Yeah. And the fact that he loses his job after one shift, and it's just like...
But do we know why that was? Was it because he went out and talked to Ramona and her ex-girlfriend?
It's because he left. He jumped in Ramona's bag and she ran away with him mid-shift.
Right, yeah, that makes sense now.
You didn't follow this very well, did you?
It's because there was a lot going on.
I know, it's quite frenetic, isn't it?
Yes, I'm reading bits being like, is this going to be paid off? Is this actually like a thing? And to be fair, by the end, it does seem like everything has actually paid off, or like everything has culminated in something else.
Yeah.
But it felt, when you're in the middle of it, it feels like just a lot of mild chaos almost. But I guess that is like kind of true for these early 20-somethings and what they do at this time, yeah? But
yeah, it really spoke to me and my kind of arty friends in our early 20s and how much effort we put into things that didn't come into fruition and all the balls that we dropped in our lives and things that went wrong for us. It really does speak to my experience being like a postgraduate, early 20-something, you know?
I'm still bewildered how Scott can do most of this stuff without a job. Like, I get in this volume, he gets a job, and that's a big plot point. And that's probably the most realistic thing of, like, him not being able to afford to do anything. And then being like, oh, I have to get a job so I can afford rent. But even that is like, how were you existing beforehand?
Well, people were just looking after him. That's the thing. He was like his roommate, the Macaulay.
I know, yeah. And he was
the
paying
Macaulay,
for the rent.
One of the Culkins.
The more famous one now, because he was in Succession.
Yes, yeah, no, he is, isn't he? Yeah, his roommate was paying for everything for him.
Yeah, and then he'll go and meet up with friends, and again, it's never explicitly mentioned, but at this point, I'm like hating Scott at this point. I'm like, is he paid for his food, or has someone bought his food for him? Like, and it just feels like to have that kind of person around you. Like, I'm sure I luckily have never been in that position, but I assume there's probably a lot of people listening who have at some point had that friend.
I've had that friend.
And it might not be malicious, but it is to the point because you like the person enough to get whatever for them in the moment. But then it does become that longer thing of like, when you actually going to get yourself together, you know? And I think I did feel that I was at least invested in this story because I was wanting to reach into the page and shake Scott and be like, just fucking get yourself together, man. Like, and that's when I realized, like, well, this is a good text because I'm invested in it. Like, that's...
I think that's the response you're supposed to have, isn't
exactly.
it?
But when it was just his faults kind of coming up way more than they did in the first 3 volumes. So volume 4 feels like his, and to an extent 5, his biggest, like, this is all his worst traits are kind of coming to surface.
Really front and center.
Yeah, that was a point where I was kind of losing a bit because I was like, I don't like this character and I'm starting to care less what happens to him. Then when bad shit happens to him in response to his faults, then I'm like, oh, now I'm on board again. Not because I wanted to see bad things happen to him, but you read anything like this with a sense of like, you want to see this karmic kind of justice happen and you want to see the character learn from it and grow. Like, that's why character arcs are so, a fundamental part of storytelling. So when the bad stuff that did start happening to him and he kind of reacted in somewhat positive ways, that was when I was like, oh, right, here we go. Now it's going.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's no more strongly felt than the very end of Volume 5 when Ramona is just puffed out of existence and we see him in his new apartment with his parents and he's like, oh, a whole brand new apartment just for me. And his dad's like, yeah, of course it is.
Enabling parents for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Like they've just like found him somewhere to live all by himself. And like Kim leaves. Like Kim goes back home. Kim goes back up north. She leaves Toronto
because she can't afford it.
Yeah,
and she falls out with her housemate for various early 20s drama, which just happens at that point, doesn't it? Yeah, I think there's a lot of richness in like the relationships and everything that happens now. I've got a lot of notes. It's mostly like pinpoints, like I feel like representations as they kind of go.
Yeah.
I made note of what I thought was a great kamikaze burn, which was Ramona telling Scott, "You're the nicest guy I've ever dated," and Scott going, "That's kind of sad." And moments like that, I was like, is he self-aware? Because he sounds it.
Kind of is This is the tragic thing, is that he kind of is self-aware.
I did like there's a panel with the basket of shopping that him and what's the roommate's name?
I forget, but I took a screenshot of that because
I thought I genuinely was going to bring up as like it's a really nice, vibrant panel of just a basket of shopping. Like I thought the art really kind of shone without people in it.
So it's a beautiful panel. I think the key thing here is that Canada's quite an expensive country to live in. At least it was at the time. And like butter was $2.99, which to somebody in the noughties in Britain would have seemed extremely expensive. And now I'm like, oh, imagine being able to get butter for £3.
I mean, literally a culinary dream. But I know what you mean, exactly. 2003 prices in anything.
But it was such a 20-somethings basket. Like, there's one ramen noodle, which is made very clear in the notes underneath the receipt. The ramen is for Scott. Wallace buys 2 Diet Cokes every day, 2 litres. Like,
that's early 20s diet,
that
for sure.
That guy pounds 4 litres of Diet Coke a day.
Once you get into your late 20s, you feel that shit.
Yeah, like that goes through you, man.
Some of it goes through, some of it stays on you. That's the problem. Just because it says diet does not necessarily mean...
Can we not talk about fucking aspartame?
I was just talking about just diet sugars in general.
Yeah,
they're not great for weight loss. There's like water retention, that kind of stuff. Obviously, I'm not a doctor. Do your own research. Unless it comes to vaccines, then listen to doctors. Also listen to doctors on diet drinks. I'm sure they're probably on the same consensus as well, aren't they? No doctors are recommending Diet Coke as like an answer to anything, really.
Yeah, it's certainly not as a replacement to fucking water.
Oh, God. That's to our American listeners.
Hey, you tell me off when I shit on the Americans too much.
There is a big thing about Americans not drinking enough water. Like that is a thing, I think. I might have read it on Reddit, oddly enough.
Everything on Reddit's true.
Yeah, obviously, yeah. election interference, probably. Definitely not that, obviously. Just want to make that clear. I got a bit annoyed by Scott not knowing that the L word... this actually comes back to what you were saying earlier. The L word he kept referencing as lesbian and not love. And I don't know if that, again, coming back to the Knives Kim bit, was that on his mind because he was thinking of that scenario, but thinking of that scenario in I'm surprised two people that I didn't know liked each other were getting off. Was it that, or like you pointed out, has he got this
weird fixation with lesbians?
Unfortunately, the reality is it's not weird. Unfortunately, like it's not uncommon.
Yeah, no, it's weird, but it's not uncommon.
Yes, it's hard to justify.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's weird that he just kept coming back to like that was a running joke.
Yeah,
and that was the point for me. And I think I've got a few other notes that we'll get to as well. But it felt like he was going through a kind of Joey syndrome.
Well, he's getting stupider.
Well, not just stupider, but just for me, I use that to describe just when the stupidity is at a level where it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
and it's hard to argue for this kind of thing where we've got the subspace channels or whatever they're called, and
which he knows how to use,
and video game fights and extra lives. At one point, he pulls a sword out of his chest. So for that stuff, I'm like, fine, that's the world we're in. But when he is the stupidest character by a mile, that for me, it kind of breaks the suspension of disbelief.
I mean, the thing with the subspace highways and him pulling a sword out of his chest and a lot of the fight scenes, there is a precedent for Scott being the best fighter in the province. Like, that's the thing. And every time Scott gets in a fight, they go, well, it's Scott, he'll be fine. That
does feel like the most random thing, because he struggles a lot in the fights.
He struggles a lot, but he's pretty good. Like, he knows what he's doing.
Well, we don't know what that'd be compared to everyone else. Like, Ramona seems like a pretty good fighter, and they never mention how good a fighter she is.
Yes, but the thing I was going to say about the subspace high race is that we're 4 issues in, and he's kind of starting to use them, but not doing a very good job of it. And Ramona nailed that in issue 1.
Well, she was already using them, wasn't she? She didn't discover them in issue 1. She'd already been using them for a while. And apparently it was her ex-girlfriend who actually showed them in the first place. Yeah. Bit of backstory lore, which I appreciated. But again, when you've got a world where all this is happening, if a character like Scott is really dumb, do I feel justified being mad at it when there's all this other stuff going on?
Yes.
Like, it's not like in Friends, Joey and Friends was literally set in the real world. Like, there was no fantastical element.
He became unbelievably thick by the end of it.
But then again, like a note I made later was Scott at one point records a bass line for their album, and then 2 minutes and some change later, he goes, that music was awesome. Who was that? And they had to go, that was you playing the bass. And that, again, for me was like, how stupid are we allowing these characters to be in this world?
I mean, I think there's a detachment with Scott, isn't there? There's a fun thing that happens in the studio, by the way, which is totally a thing that happens in the music recording process, where Scott recorded something and was like, that sounds great. And the guy was like, yeah, I'm just going to record it when you leave.
Yeah.
That's so a thing that happens to bassists and drummers all the fucking time.
Yeah. It seemed like that kind of stuff was like low key enough that it seemed realistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, the focus on Scott's stupidity kind of took me out a little bit. But again, then I felt more justified when his friends were getting mad at him for this kind of stuff. There was one bit where I actually empathized with Scott quite a bit, which might have seemed stupid, but I actually think was more of a realistic point. There's a point where him and Ramona are talking, and the conversation becomes, why do we like each other? Like, that's the topic. And I felt like Scott got kind of cornered in an unfair way, because he can't articulate why he likes Ramona, right? And she gets a little mad at him, and he kind of points, he says at one point, like, well, you're hot, and she's, like, well, is that it kind of thing? I did feel a bit of empathy for Scott, but like, if you are into someone and around them and enjoying their company, I think it's really difficult to articulate, why do you enjoy my company? Like, why do you like someone?
But they're the kind of conversations that new couples will have. Like, it is accurate.
That's what I mean. I empathized with him, I think, I could imagine being in that scenario. Probably have to some degree. Like, someone's asked you to answer a question, a deep personal question that could only be answered if you were like Shakespearean poet,
Yes.
And a young 20-something in 2003 isn't going to probably be able to articulate, like, this is why you make me feel good.
And Scott doesn't have a high degree of emotional intelligence either.
Exactly.
His EQ is very low.
But then the part that I was actually pushed me on Scott's side was when I realized that when Ramona, because she kind of gets like well, I've described why I like you, so why are you find it so
Her
difficult?
reason wasn't great, was it?
Her reason was she describes him as small-minded or simple-minded. Simple-minded. So when she's kind of get like, oh, you're finding it difficult to describe me, I was like, you called him simple. Like, that's not good.
You like the fact that he struggles to explain things. He's
Exactly.
simple-minded.
And then the problem is, because he is simple-minded, he doesn't catch on to her calling her simple. It's like a week later, be like, hey, wait a minute. Like,
Is there are we identified that there's an undercurrent sense that Scott Pilgrim might have some learning difficulties? Is this what we're saying?
I mean, emotional for sure. I think ADHD is like the probably most likely candidate for Scott. I think that answers a lot with him.
I identify with a lot of what's going on for Scott.
Yes. And maybe again, all his faults. Maybe that's why this is such a great story. Is because it's so relatable, especially to like us who grew up and were similar. Well, I mean, they're a lot older than...
We're a decade younger than them.
But it still feels like that coming of age in this modern society. There's a lot of crossover despite the technological differences. It does feel like this age of like being in arrested development for much longer in life, which I think is a topic we covered in the first episode. But yeah, growing up is happening at a later and later point in life nowadays than it was like 50 years ago.
Do you notice there's an omission of a really core character from the first 3 volumes?
I'm going to try and remember to see if I'm going to try and think to remember if I can who that is. No, I don't think so.
His sister.
Yeah, who was Anna Kendrick in the film.
Yes.
Yeah. Wasn't she the one at the coffee shop?
Yeah, but again, he goes to the... There's a really fun moment where Scott being really stupid, doesn't realise that not all of the exteriors of this coffee shop lead to the same interior. And so he walks into another branch of the coffee shop his sister works in and sees Knives working there. Or Tamara.
Knives, I think.
It is Knives. And it's just like, oh, you're not my sister. So she's still about, but she's just not talking to Scott, or he's not really talking to his sister.
I think she was mainly a function of introducing him to other people in the first volumes.
Because she was cool and had her shit together.
Yeah, and that's probably why she's fucked off now. She's like, look, I don't want any of this bollocks that Scott's in. I've got my shit together. I'm just going to get on with my life.
Yeah, maybe. But that's fucking hilarious, isn't it? His sister's just
canon.
Sister's just abandoned him.
I think the whole him getting a job was like a kind of make or break bit for me. Like, because as soon as the job was mentioned, I was like, again, Chekhov's job. I was like, is he going to get it? And is he going to keep it? Probably not. When he was asking people about jobs, I was trying to interpret his reluctance. I couldn't tell if it was him embarrassed about asking for a job, like the fact that he couldn't just get one by himself, that he needed to rely on a friend, or was he just literally reluctant to get a job, but still felt that he needed to?
I think this speaks to his lack of awareness to the world, where he wasn't able to comprehend of a job that one of his friends wasn't already doing. He was like, well, they have jobs there, so that must be where jobs are from.
Yeah. But even then, you would think that inspires some kind of confidence of like, here's the jobs. Can I have a job, please?
Yeah.
Like, he was still kind of like, oh, jobs? And they're like, what? He's like, nothing. Like, I thought that was weird. I was trying to work out what the meaning of it was.
But then he got a job and he held it down right until the end of Volume 5.
He got the job and then he got fired, but then he managed to plead his case because the running theme is Scott's life, it always works out for him in the end. So he gets it back. And that's why the running joke of his friends saying that if his life was a person, they'd punch him in the face or punch his life in the face.
Yeah, and then, because they make the joke and then they torture it. If your life had a face, I'd punch it.
Yeah.
And then at the end, Stephen still says, if your life had a face, I'd kick it in the balls.
Yeah. And I get it because, again, it just always works out for him. Like, he fucked up a job, but then he's like, oh, can I have my job back, please? And they're like, all right, fine.
Yeah, we hadn't hired anyone else.
Yeah.
Fuck it.
Which, those kind of minimum wage jobs, that is a bit of realism, isn't it?
I know how it works. Yeah.
You have to really fuck up for a minimum wage job to be like, actually, we don't want you back. To really, I mean, not these days, because, well, I don't know. I don't know what the job scene is right now. How high is unemployment right now? I haven't checked the data.
That is a position of privilege, my friend.
Yes.
My brother in Christ.
We are privileged.
Yeah, we are.
It'd be worse to not acknowledge the privilege. That's the worst thing you can do if you're privileged. Well, There's much worse things you can do if you're privileged.
I was going to say, mate, have you seen the Tory party recently?
It's one of the bad things you can do if you're privileged.
It's one of the ways you can misuse privilege.
Yeah. I did really appreciate after his first day that it was, the time lapse was 1 million hours later. Yeah. That is exactly, I mean, we've done those jobs. It's exactly your first day. Maybe you have a trial shift to begin with, and that's only a couple of hours. But then the first proper shift is like the one where you actually like, oh no, you actually have to stay till close. And you're like, oh, what? And then you're like, oh my God, how long was that shift?
Ryan's referencing this specifically because I just got a second job in a bar. You
didn't have to mention it if you didn't want to.
No, mate, I'm doing it. Again, very privileged. I'm doing it for fun.
Working for fun.
I know, right?
Disgusting.
I'm doing it because it looks like a fucking laugh.
Disgusting. But yeah, million hours later, I think like first person's job, that was like Bryan Lee O'Malley does have a real knack for kind of articulating not just through dialogue, but through like the tropes of the comic, like articulating like the feeling of young people at that time.
I've been a pot washer. Yeah. I've done that job, and it does.
That was my first job. Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%.
And when you get like it all builds up, and you just kind of stand there like I could either freak out, overwhelmed of the work, or I just get on with it.
When you got your first pot washing job, how old were you and how much did you get paid?
16.
Yeah.
And might have been 15. Minimum wage, whatever that was. I think it was like £4, £5 an hour,
so
maybe.
I was 13 and I got £4 an hour.
Yeah.
And I worked 4 hours on a Friday night and 4 hours on a Saturday night, and I was balling. I had more money than anyone in my friendship group.
A kid with money is like a monkey with a machine gun. Don't know what to do. Not going to do anything good with it. Not for a few years.
Yeah, absolutely.
It did feel a bit like there was a lot of filler. Like I said earlier, it felt like a lot of mild chaos was going on. I didn't know if everything was going to pay off. I did get a feeling midway through volume 4 that I was like, is this just filler? Like, is this important what's happening now? And by the end, it did feel like everything was there for a reason.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get the feeling of like, ooh, this tapestry of like points that all culminated like a bloody George R.R. Martin. Like, it didn't quite feel like that, but it did, at least when I thought about it, I was like, well, yeah, that led to that, and I suppose that led to that, and yeah, that.
There's a strong sense of cause and effect here, and everything pays off. I think the thing with it is we're so used to such high drama in comic books. We're so used to comics being these superhero life or death things, particularly comics that have the supernatural element that this does. If there's a science fiction or supernatural element, things usually become quite high stakes.
Yeah.
Whereas this is all very low stakes shit. There is an album being made that only ends up being 17 minutes long.
I mean, a band's first album, is that not like a normal kind of time?
No, and at a long plays half an hour, isn't it?
Yeah, but an open mic band who aren't represented or anything. Like.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the funny thing about Sex Bomb is that they do make these like 1 minute, 2 minute long punk songs.
Yeah,
and
so like, a first punk album, 17 minutes. That's like what, almost 17 songs. Like, not far off.
It's actually 34 songs, right?
Exactly. So I mean, bloody these days, if you listen to bloody pop music these days, it's like less than a minute long. Some songs, it's crazy.
Ryan, there is a record collection down there. And it's almost exclusively people that were dead before I was born, mate. I don't listen to a whole lot of modern pop music.
So apparently, I don't listen to music either, but
I don't listen to music. I have no joy there.
No music. But I've seen the song lengths being an issue, and apparently what the reason is because of Spotify. It's because artists literally get more from more listens per song.
Yeah.
More songs with more listens than overall listens of like an album, because every song is individual. Yeah. So to them, it's, well, I could make a 3.5 minute song, or I could make a 1.5 minute song, and then people will listen to more songs, and I will have more listens as an artist. So it's literally, the technology has literally changed pop music.
40 years ago, if you put out a 17-minute album, people would be like, that doesn't fill a 12-inch. Why the fuck would I buy this?
And even as late as like 20 years ago, it'd be like, oh, a concept album. Like it was just, it had its own niche. But nowadays it's just like, I mean, no, I don't think any pop artists are going to make like 17-minute songs. Maybe an album. That literally might be their albums these days.
That's a sad thought, isn't it?
And we're getting older, as a constant reminder.
Yeah, fuck. I mean, I think there's this thing where I am a younger millennial, but I consume music the same way that my dad did in the 70s. Like, I like buying vinyl and listening to vinyl.
Basically, we're hipsters.
Yeah, but I don't like to phrase it that way, Ryan.
Because it's true. I think a friend of ours did make a good point recently, is that we're all hipsters. Unless you're into the mainstream stuff, then to be a hipster is to be like into more niche stuff, but niche things are bigger now than they've ever been before because
they
the
have
internet.
a place to exist. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's more rare to not be hipster in any way by the strictest definitions than it is to be hipster.
And Scott Pilgrim's a really great example. Like, this wasn't
this
huge
is the hipster comic.
Yeah, they're all bitter hipsters. And like, the comic itself, before the film came out, pretty, I don't like to use the term underground, but it wasn't a huge blockbuster, was it?
It was known in comic book circles, which at that time was still like comic book movies. We'd had like Spider-Man, X-Men, and obviously your Batman and Superman before, but still comic books. Superheroes were more popular. Comic books as a medium was still completely undertouched by the mainstream. But within comics, there's one of these volumes won the 2006 Best Comic of the Year.
Yes.
Or an award. So they were known, but within this very niche market.
He never got an Eisner, though, did he?
No, and I can understand why. I think Eisners are, like you were saying about the stakes, I feel like Eisners are a bit more like that kind of level stuff. Like Why the Last Man and Mouse and things like that. Whereas this, it feels like you've done a really good job of articulating the angst of a early 20-something Canadian, but unfortunately no one cares that much.
I mean, it's cool. Like, I feel like Toronto is less of a character in this. The setting is less prominent and prevalent in this issue, in these volumes, than the first three.
Well, that's the thing we've seen before, where do you remember Rogue Sun? It was set in New Orleans, and that was very much if it's set on New Orleans, that's only evident in like the first couple of issues, and then it's kind of gone.
You don't see enough of New Orleans, do you?
I think it's because it's part of the setting, which is what you do in the first couple of issues, and then if you're making an interesting enough story, then that becomes the focus. But then maybe you might be like, if it's San Francisco, a few issues you might, they're on the Golden Gate Bridge or something later. But
and they reference some really Canadian things in the first volume. Like, they talk about the Tragically Hip, who are, I think I talked about it in the first episode, but we're going to do it again.
Yes. Part 2, baby.
The Tragically Hip were a huge Canadian kind of soft rock band.
Right.
And if you were a cool kid in Canada in the 90s and 2000s, you had Tragically Hip CDs and you put them on at parties. Like, they were the fucking dudes. And that kind of comes up in the first volume, and it's like, there's a little reference to something a bit Canadian and a bit cool. And then in this issue, they're just kind of bleh.
I think it's because O'Malley does have to fit the actual plot now more, and I think you have to be a bit more conservative with like panel space and page space and stuff like that.
We've not talked about the art yet.
Well, it's because the art is pretty much the same as the first one, so that's kind of why I skipped it.
I don't think it coloured very well.
Fair enough.
And I don't think that is a slight on the colorist at all.
I enjoyed the coloring. There were some parts where it's evidently good, like the shopping basket and things like that.
Really vibrant, really beautiful.
And then the rest of the time, I didn't notice it, which is it's an achievement in itself when it's just doing the job.
So a running joke through the comic book is that Ramona Flowers' hair changes all the time and you can't see the color change.
Yeah, I was going to question that, and you've just answered that already. Because I was going to be like, hang on, how do they do that in the black and white? And that makes sense now.
They had little notes that they deleted out.
They should have left in the notes.
Yeah, which is funnier, isn't it?
It would have been a great callback.
Because I'm so confident that the first time I read this, I read it in black and grey.
Yeah.
And I preferred it black and grey than I did coloured.
See, I haven't read the black and grey. I feel like the coloured works more, not only for the coloured hair, which is why I was going to ask that dumb question, but also, like, I was thinking about another black and white comic, The Walking Dead. That's obviously a lot more tonally fits because it's meant to be dark and gloomy, and, the lack of colours, the lack of, like, life in the world and stuff like that. Whereas for this, I feel like it's only black and white because of it's the manga influence.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. But it looked great black and grey.
I feel like the color one must be pretty good as well. Like, I'd have to compare 1 and 2, but I feel like the color must have been pretty good as well. There's less lines in the clouds. So for listeners, Jamie is showing me a panel. It's of something Demon Head, the band.
Yeah.
And in the black and white one, there's a lot more lines in the cloud in the smoke behind them. Whereas in the color one, for some reason, they take out the lines. And I think for me, that's the biggest difference.
They also neatened up some of the faces. So if you look, her face is just a little less sleek and a bit more anime.
Yeah.
And then when you get into the color one look, they've sleekened her face up a little bit.
Yeah. And I suppose that must have been for a reason. I think it must have like fit the coloring a bit better.
It's just a redesign, isn't it? Like they gave it a spruce up. But I did prefer it in black and grey.
Yeah.
But I like black and grey art.
Yeah,
you know,
I think it's personal preference.
I have arms full of black and white tattoos, don't I? Like I like stuff in black and grey.
I thought you just couldn't afford the colour.
Do you know, annoyingly, getting tattooed in black and grey does not make it any cheaper.
Surely there must be extra time that you save, like an hour of work if they don't colour it, don't they?
Well, no, because the shading takes just as long.
Yeah, but then colouring on top of shading. Do they not do shading as well with colouring?
A little bit. So you'll punch a little bit of shading in and then you'll colour.
It probably depends on the tattoo. I think the best example is like if you got a tattoo of a Rubik's Cube. If you got that in black and white, that'd probably be a lot quicker than if you got the colours on it.
Yeah.
So it probably depends per tattoo. But I did find the tension in some scenes did really ramp up at points. The main point that I made of was when Scott's in Lisa's apartment.
Yeah.
That I was surprised and almost like taken aback by how well paced that it suddenly like slowed down.
It's so interesting because we see him with knives and he's very naive. And he's this grown man with a teenage girl, but we kind of get a sense that there's nothing lascivious happening there.
Yeah.
And then he meets Ramona and his first sexual encounters with her are incredibly awkward and he's incredibly naive. And then he's in Lisa's apartment and he's like, "You've been dressing up for me. Aren't I lucky?" And it's like you've noticed that he's accrued this sexual confidence that he didn't have before. And ultimately, he's like, "I love Ramona," and they have an actual conversation, and it's very, I think, quite sensitively handled. But yeah, no, you are right. They create more tension in those scenes. There's a different kind of tension in those scenes, isn't there?
I felt like I was worried about the outcome of this individual scene.
Yeah, whereas volumes 1 and 2, Scott, he kind of was almost asexual.
He's naive enough that, yeah, he comes across that way for sure. But yeah, it felt like a ramping up of sexual tension. I did feel like they were trying to have the cake and eat it too, where he had the waking up the next morning not remembering what happened. And I was like, why? He doesn't drink. And they address it where he's like, "Why don't I remember anything?" And she's like, "Well, you did eat a lot of pizza." I was like...
Yeah.
I was like, is that just for the joke? Or because I think they were trying to have that like the trope, you know, waking up next morning, "Oh my God, did anything happen between us?" The other person going, "No, you passed out," or whatever. And that relief of like, "Oh, thank God." And I think they were trying to have that, but then after it's like, "Oh yeah, he doesn't drink." Let's just say he had too much pizza. So I think they were trying to have that trope without it justifying.
He gets drunk for the first time.
Yeah, off 2 sips, which was incredibly realistic for someone who hasn't drunk before.
And then he turns up hungover to a big fight.
Yeah, I've never been hungover before.
Yeah. He's like, "Why do I feel so sluggish?"
I do find it interesting that he was written to be a non-drinker and is now drinking. Like, it feels quite... You would think anyone else, I think, writing an early 20-something kid, like, essentially, would be drinking at this point. All his friends drink. And it's I don't know. I was surprised, I think, in the first volumes that he wasn't drinking. And I'm even more surprised now that he started drinking. Like, it wasn't like a hard and fast, like, "I don't drink," which some people are just like that. Like, I'm more surprised if I speak to someone, they go, "Oh, I've never tried alcohol and I choose not to." And I'm like, that's a great choice.
How have you managed that?
Well, exactly. It's a good choice. I'm surprised you got to it so quickly.
We live in Britain, it's everywhere.
It's part of the culture. It's literally in our blood.
Well, not right now. It's a Monday, but...
How long has it been since since the last one?
I'm pleading.
How long has it been since breakfast?
Oh, Ryan, darling. Pre-breakfast.
The Europeans wouldn't dream of starting the day without a tequila or two.
Oh, are you referencing the Mitchell and Webb sketch?
Yeah. The greatest sketch of all time.
So good. So well performed.
One of the best pieces of writing in the modern world, I would say.
And beautifully performed by both of them.
Yes. Nailed it. Like, I don't know even what you call it. Like, Mitchell and Webb shop, like, corner shop sketch or something, probably. But if you're listening, look it up. It's amazing. I don't know if I'm overselling it because I just love it so much.
No, I watched it the other day and it really tickled me again, the same way it did 10 years ago when it came, more than 10 years ago that it came out.
David Mitchell, in terms of comedy sketches, this is his There Will Be Blood, Daniel Day-Lewis. Like, this is his, like, living the character.
This is his 4 candles sketch.
Yes.
It was their 4 candles moment, wasn't it? Something funny happens in a corner shop.
But it also gets so under, like, I've not heard anyone else talk about it.
It's so weird because Peep Show is beloved, right? And Peep Show is good. But I think their sketch show was as good, if not better.
Well, the sketch show they wrote. They didn't write Peep Show.
Oh, they just starred in Peep Show.
Yeah. But they influenced Peep Show a lot. Like, they made the characters, basically.
And Olivia Colman's in the sketch show a lot.
Yep.
And she is just golden in whatever she's in. She's such a good actor.
Yeah. I mean, she bloody won an Oscar later, so...
Did she?
Yeah.
What did she get an Oscar for?
I think it was... God, put me on the spot now. There, let me Google it.
Is Olivia... Because she's one of ours, mate.
Yeah, she's one of us. She was in Peep Shows. Oh, around here.
Yeah, she's from Norwich, mate.
I literally had no idea.
Yeah, she's from the Golden Triangle.
Well, I've never seen her, so...
Well, she doesn't live in the Golden Triangle anymore, mate, but she's from Norwich.
It's a whole nother page for awards.
She's got that many of them.
She's got a lot, but I want to know where the main one is from. She's got a lot of the television awards, but I want to know where the film award is from.
I imagine she got a TV award for Peep Show at some point.
She won the Best Actress Academy Award for a film called The Favourite in 2019.
Cool.
Where a period black comedy film. So, like relative to, the Mitchell Webb sketch stuff she probably did.
Cool.
And a bunch of BAFTA awards and stuff like that as well.
She's a fantastic actor.
Yeah, of course.
Did you notice her cameo in The Bear?
Yeah, that was a great one. Yeah.
She was really good at it, wasn't she?
So many weird cameos in that.
I know, and not in this first season. It seems that it's one of those things that when they were making season 2, it was so popular that they could just call up anyone and be like, "You want a cameo?"
Yeah. Well, I'm going to mention something somewhat related, tangentially related to that later.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't upset the people.
No, I was just looking at those because I did appreciate towards the end of Volume 5, we actually started getting some reveals I didn't see coming. And I think...
what did you not spot?
I for some reason didn't anticipate that the guy with the sword following Scott was Knives' dad.
Yeah.
And I think, to be fair, I don't know if that's a good thing because I didn't... I think it helped better because when everything was a bit scattershot, I felt like, is this all going to come together? So when it actually did, it was more of a surprise to me. Whereas if it was like a by the numbers, more of a standard plot, like a standard story arc, I would have seen it coming. But because you had all this different stuff going on with the different relationships and then some like action sprinkled in between them, which goes underplayed, which I think is part of the story. Like Scott's fighting a robot, like it's underplayed.
Yeah.
I'd say it's probably Volume 4 I'm talking about the end of.
Did you notice the really nice consequence of the whole subplot with Knives' dad?
That he basically respects Scott somewhat towards the end.
Yes.
And that helps Knives.
Well, he comes in and says, I think Scott Pilgrim would be a perfectly acceptable boyfriend for you. And that's the point at which she stops following Scott around and gets into Steve. And it's like... Now that her dad approved, she's like, actually, this other guy's pretty good looking.
I don't think I noticed that, but that is a astute observation.
Yeah, that's how it all played out. And they don't reference it, but it is what happens, and I just think it's fun.
I did like the joke of the dad when he says that. I can't remember what he says, but he's basically Knives and her friend are at Knives' house, and the dad walks past and says something in Chinese. Yeah. And then the friend goes, what did he say? And Knives goes, I don't know, it's in Chinese.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a great joke because I think I think a lot of Western readers would just have the incorrect assumption that someone who was born of first generation immigrants would know the language of where they're from.
Doesn't.
And she doesn't. And it is a point for me where I was like, of course she doesn't just automatically know Chinese just because her parents are Chinese. So, yeah, I thought that was a fun joke, and it literally plays into the reader's expectation. So I didn't feel like a piece of shit being like, oh, wait, because it was literally geared towards that.
Yeah, no, they knew you were going to make that assumption, that misapprehension. They knew you were going to have that misapprehension, and they subverted it.
My physical reaction literally went, all right, you got me.
Oh, yeah, all right, mate.
You knew what I was going to do. But yeah, I thought that was really smart. I did notice towards this point there was a page I noticed there. I think it was towards the end of one of the volumes. I think on Volume 4, there was some special thanks. And they were very 2006, I think this one came out. It very of 2006 because one of the special thanks was Kanye West.
Why were they thanking Kanye?
I think maybe he referenced them in a song or something. And
that's hilarious.
That speaking of things that don't age well, that might be the worst.
Yeah.
I just searched Kanye West, Scott Pilgrim, and the first result to come up is a Reddit page. Why is Kanye West thanked at the beginning of Scott Pilgrim?
So maybe we're not going to get answers to this one.
I mean, it's Reddit, so it might provide them, or it might just, be conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
So apparently, O'Malley included Kanye because he was one of the artists that he was listening to when he was working on the books. So fair enough,
right?
I guess.
Okay. I mean, that's just so, isn't it?
I mean, again, it's what's it? Hitching your wagon to the wrong horse.
I'm a bit whelmed by that, Ryan.
That is a good whelm, dude. So I'm neither over nor under.
Yeah, I'm just whelmed by it.
But I did like this point. We start getting to even more of the foreshadowing of Gideon.
Yeah,
and that was something we touched on in the first volumes. But I feel like it appropriately ramps up at the right times.
There's this really interesting thing that happens in Volume 6 where we start to see a lot of Ramona's interior monologue, and she is chained up as a kind of, think Jabba the Hutt and Leia, with Gideon having her chained up.
Right, yeah.
And you don't notice it in issue 5 when he accidentally goes through the subspace highway that goes through her brain. But she's like, no, get out of here, and she pushes him out.
Yeah.
And it's because Gideon is in there with her, right? And that's where the light is coming from, and that's like the big arc of Volume 6.
I felt like that was a great metaphor, and this is my interpretation, feel free if I'm wrong. I felt like that was a great metaphor for her still having this carried on trauma from an abusive ex, like to a degree, like within this kind of context. But it felt like the reason she was pushing him out, it wasn't like, get out of here, I'm still in love with Gideon. It was like, this is my private pain, and I don't want anyone to see it. I'm not ready for you to see it.
It's kind of both.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Once you get into Volume 6 is quite a lot heavier. There is a tonal shift for Volume 6. Probably going to read Volume 6 again over the next few days just to cap it off.
Sure. Well, at some point we're gonna do the last one. Like there'll be more Scott Pilgrim stuff.
We're gonna have to.
The overarching arc of all the comics that would have been like our overarching arc of the podcast. I did not anticipate it being Scott Pilgrim.
Yeah, no, it's a weird one. It's a weird one for us to have latched onto like this because it's not even that popular anymore.
Well, I mean, you say that, but the reason we're doing it might be again. I mean, it was a very popular film, and I think it was like a cult audience film when it came out.
Yeah.
I think it did well as well. I mean, Edgar Wright got more famous and successful on the back of it.
I mean, Edgar Wright couldn't miss at this point in time.
Well, so one thing I was going to say, we were going to do the comic and then I was going to mention this at the end, but I'll mention it now. What we're doing this in tie-in of is a animated TV show based more directly on the comics than the film was. So, and the art is literally like the colored art of the comic book
really
in
similar,
motion. Yeah. But what's interesting...
In motion,
it's moving.
No. You're absolutely perfectly accurate. It's just a weird way of phrasing it.
Like a Harry Potter picture. They're always moving.
Phrasing.
But the actual voice cast, as we saw in the reveal trailer, which I think I showed you, the part of the reveal trailer...
Show me. No, I've never seen it.
I think I saw you a link. I was like, hey, look at this.
You sending me a link and me actually watching something are two very different things.
Yep, now that you point out. That ADHD again. Well, let's get a live reaction. Famous Comic Literate podcast, live reactions from Jamie.
This is becoming a thing now, where you just make me react to cartoon trailers.
Trailers or just very violent sections.
Yeah.
Very violent parts. Right, so now I'm going to show you, and I'll cut out the 2 minutes that you're watching it, and then we'll check back in with you.
Okay, we'll check back in with Jamie. I like that Brian has a grandma case on his phone, like a wallet case. Do the little thing where you stand it up on it, and that's quite enjoyable to me.
I don't know why everyone else doesn't have it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It looks amazing.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think Michael Cera was the right choice to voice an animated Scott Pilgrim.
I mean, I think the big part of it is they are getting all the same voice cast back from the film.
I mean, there's one that we're missing.
Which one?
The first Evil X, the skateboarding dude.
Yes.
In the film, he was played by Chris Pine, I want to say. Or
no, Chris Evans.
Yeah,
he's back.
No shit, they actually got Chris Evans for it.
So this was a point I kept alluding to that I was going to finally make now, having shown you this. So what happened was, when they made the film, apparently they had such a great time, all the actors and Edgar as well, they had such a great time that they made an email chain where they were all in.
Aww.
And they all kept in touch. And apparently Chris Evans said this, apparently like whenever any of them had anything big, they all like congratulated each other on this chain and stuff. And then when it came time to making this animated show, Edgar Wright is a producer on it. And he was like, I wonder who I can get back from the original cast. So he literally, I think he got maybe like Michael Cera first, and maybe...
Did he resurrect a 20-year-old email chain?
He didn't resurrect it. It was still going.
That's so cute.
And he went into it. He was just like, hey, we're making the animated show. Does anyone want to reprise their roles? And everyone said yes.
So,
and
Ryan, what I need you to do for me now is your best Michael Cera impression. Him writing a congratulatory email to Chris Evans after The Winter Soldier came out.
All right. Hey, Chris, I saw The Winter Soldier and thought it was really good. Yeah. That's it.
Is that all he said?
Yeah.
Like one of the biggest films of the decade.
Yeah. Michael Cera, he's not like an over-the-top, like, he's quite succinct.
Can you imagine Chris Evans having to sit and watch the rebooted season of Arrested Development just so he had something nice to say to Michael Cera about it?
I think at that time he was probably more like, how are the films going? Like, 'cause he was doing films at that time as well. Like, he was more famous by that point. But the main point as well is that apparently not the reason they all said yes was all the actors have said Edgar Wright is amazing to work with. Like, that is a common consensus.
Simon Pegg, Nick Frost say the same thing.
But then, like, they came up together, so you would expect them to say that. It's like, bloody Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi, like, they were friends before they made the film.
But Seth Rogen and, oh God, what's his name? Squinty Eyes. James Franco.
Do you want me to take out that?
No, James Franco has squinty eyes. Like,
there is the roast of James Franco ages ago. There was someone pointed out like that, like, James Franco is such a great actor. Sometimes you can't tell when he's awake.
Scandal noted.
Yeah, scandal noted. Yeah,
but they all have horrible things to say about Judd Apatow.
Yeah,
like they're all like, he's great, but he's fucking brutal to be around.
And I think Judd Apatow's like, yes, that is true. Like,
do you know when they were working on Freaks and Geeks, he wasn't always on set. He was in a control room, and when they didn't perform very well, they would just hear him booing from another room. And they were young kids. Like, Jason Starr would have been like 16, 17 at the time.
Jason Segel?
No,
Jason Starr.
Jason Starr.
Which one's that one? Who is that? What else would I maybe know him from?
You'd know him from Knocked Up.
They're all in all the Freaks and Geeks guys are in Knocked Up.
They're all in Knocked Up.
You don't know how little that doesn't narrow it down.
He's the guy who is. He takes Robin.
You think Martin Starr?
Martin Starr. There we go. Sorry, mate.
You combine Jason Segel and Martin Starr together.
Fucked up.
Sorry,
No wonder you didn't have a scoop of what I was on about.
We'll fix it in editing.
Nah, leave it.
Or I'll make it worse. Either way.
I mean, the people who listen to this podcast should know that I have severe face blindness when it comes to other human beings. I'm like Scott.
And yet, it's more of an issue when the characters in a comic don't look individual or memorable. Maybe because you struggle to
I struggle so much.
Them. Well, now we've got to the end of that. We've got to the bottom of that mystery. But main thing is, Scott Pilgrim takes off, looks awesome. We'll speak on it once we've both had a chance to watch it once it's come out.
Is it not out yet?
I think it comes out. I mean, it comes out this weekend. No, from when we're recording, it comes out. When you're listening to this, it's already have just come out.
Yeah. So write in, tell us if it's good or not.
Yep. And we'll do a little bit of a it was fine. Or, it was cool. But yeah, Edgar Wright apparently great to work with, so that's the main takeaway. One last bit, I didn't take as many notes for Volume 5, and I feel like that's because it continues a lot of the themes and stuff from 4.
We've talked about both volumes in detail, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of my notes were more from 4 because I was more engrossed in 5, but it felt like 5 was paying off a lot of the stuff that happened in 4, and while also continuing the mystery.
They definitely felt like a pair, didn't they?
Yeah, exactly. And I was glad that you said the 6 was like twice the length. I was like, thank God we've separated them.
No, 6 is an unwieldy beast. It's a really heavy volume because obviously Ramona's not about for a lot of it.
5, I think, has the least in the film. Because in the film, they literally turned the twin X's into a music fight, a music battle.
Yeah, which was really fucking cool.
Great, but you can see why they were like, we have to condense this entire volume into one fight. And none of the backstory from 5.
And
except for Ramona disappearing.
Yeah. And I kind of feel like the film, because I read the books before I watched the film.
Yeah.
Right? And I only watched it because Edgar Wright directed it. And it was like, oh, Edgar Wright made a film out of this comic book I like. I'll give that a watch. And I watched it and remember feeling that they had taken one and strapped the ending onto it. And that's kind of like they'd taken the first volume and a half, roughly.
First two, I'd go so far as to say two, because they have a lot of and three, because they have a lot more stuff with the Rise of Demon Head band and the vegan ex-boyfriend.
Yeah.
So they have a lot more of that stuff. But then when reading volume 3, they had the whole thing in the supermarket, and I was like, I don't know any of this stuff. So, but I feel like 5 is the least in the film. I did really appreciate the running joke where Scott was constantly fighting robots in the background. And like you pointed out, it's like Scott's in the fight. They're like, oh, Scott can handle it.
Yeah.
But literally there's like other more important character dialogue going on between characters and him's just in the background, like wrestling with a robot.
And this has been going on for 7 months for these characters. There's been 7 months where Scott just keeps having random fights at social events. And so and it's kind of believable. They'd be like, ugh, yeah, Scott's fine. He'll deal with it.
See, it kind of feels like the film, the 7X is kind of happening over what feels like more like a week or so.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like if you were, imagine you're in this position fighting 7 evil X's. If it happened over 7 months, I feel like that time would be so stressful.
Yeah.
Like beyond all the finding a job and all that. Like,
yeah, maybe we're selling shots, Scott. Whoa, ooh, words, language. I'm struggling.
We're shorting Scott.
Like he's a stock.
Yes, Big Short.
I watched The Big Short recently.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Oh, it's so good. The way that they get cameos in to describe the heavy financial stuff. And the first time they do it, it's Margot Robbie in the bath. And you're like, that's just so funny and so clever. Yeah, The Big Short's really fucking excellent.
Christian Bale, amazing. Steve Carell, like best performance, I think.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, people talk about Steve Carell in The Office, but fuck was he good in this.
Yeah.
Angry and bitter, but engrossed in that world. Oh, really fascinating.
And Brad Pitt just kind of played himself. Like,
yeah.
He did what the role needed. Like, it wasn't too much.
I thought he was really good in it. I thought Ryan Gosling was good in it.
Oh, he's great in it. Pumped to the tits.
And did you notice the trepidation there? Because I always get him mixed up with Ryan Reynolds.
I mean, a lot of people do.
They just look the fucking same.
They're both Canadian Ryans.
Are they Canadian?
They're both Canadian, yeah.
I should know this, shouldn't I?
It's not that it's not that important information, is it? I know it because I just into that kind of stuff. So
well, you like Deadpool a lot, don't you?
Yeah, and Ryan Gosling's fun. You ever see the sketch with him and Will Ferrell, Knife Guys?
Yes, I have.
So good.
I've seen that. Yeah.
The
Big Short, man. Highly recommend it. Yeah. Highly recommend it.
If they ever do a comic book adaptation of The Big Short, we'll do that.
I mean, we should just make that.
Without any permissions at all or anything.
And then we can just pay somebody to draw Margot Robbie in a bath. It's such a weird day for the artist.
Unfortunately, it's probably not.
I bet we could go on Tumblr and find.
They probably already have done it to request. Yeah,
absolutely, to request, just for their own fucking sick pleasure.
Well, to someone's commissioned them for their sick pleasure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's pretty much volumes 4 and 5 wrapped and covered, I would say. And we're pretty much within the time. I mean, we're about hour 20-ish. Yeah. So do we wrap or do we do anything else?
Well, there's something I've wanted to mention. There's something that has happened recently that just feels objectively important, Ryan.
I mean, of all the things in the world, the fact that I know what you're going to talk about kind of under whatever the term is. I know what you're going to say, but go on. It is a big thing in the world of people who are into this thing.
Yeah, the Beatles released a new single.
They were very keen to get it out before the end of the year.
Yeah. And
they used Ouija boards for the other two, didn't they?
Have you listened to it yet?
I've not. No, I still haven't got around to it.
I'm going to get your live reaction.
Okay. I feel like my live reaction is probably going to be something along the lines of like, that's a Beatles song.
The listeners here, I've actually connected my phone to my sound system because I need Ryan to just experience this with me.
Big moves happening. Yeah, it was all right. It was good. It was really good.
Do you not think it's like so beautiful?
It was really good. It was what I imagine, if I had to imagine beforehand, like what would a long forgotten resurfaced last Beatles song would sound like, is what I kind of imagine would. Like it fits what it would expect it to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think it's come up on the podcast before that I'm a rabid Beatles fan. Like, I'm pretty sure I've gone over and pulled out a copy of Sgt. Pepper's for you while we've been recording and stuff. And I think the core of the experience for me was that it's the last time I ever get to hear a Beatles song for the first time. And I didn't think I'd ever get that experience again in my life because I'm a fan and I've listened to the anthology and I've worked my way through their discography over the years. And so I put the song on and I stood in the middle of my living room so that I was right in front of my speakers and just stood and absorbed it. And I listened to it twice through and had a little cry. And it was just such a special moment. And I think it was the same for a lot of people. I've listened to it a lot. I was gonna say, when you started playing, I imagined your neighbours being like, he's playing that fucking song again. Yeah. And I've listened to it like once or twice a day since it came out. And there's a couple of things I've noticed about it that just really charm me. So the Beatles obviously always had high harmonies. And it's because Paul and George did a lot of the harmonies, or John did a lot of the harmonies. And they all had voices in that upper register when they were younger. But of course, when they had the first stab at re-recording this back in the day, they didn't get very far with it because of the way that John's vocal was glued to a piano track.
Right.
They didn't get to the point where they were laying down harmonies, and George wasn't very well at the time. And so when they did the harmonies this time round, it was Old Man Paul and Ringo doing the harmonies. And so they have low harmonies instead of high harmonies in it. And so the harmonies are sitting underneath John's voice, not soaring above it. I don't know if you got that, if you clocked it.
Not with my amateur ear.
But it's just so weird because it's so different for a Beatles song. Like, to have low harmonies in a Beatles song is just really unusual.
It's good that it's expected that a Beatles song would have like new things you realize every listen and that kind of depth to the song.
Yeah, and it's just, and like the lyrics, I know they were about one thing because John sat and wrote them at a piano without any of the other Beatles there, and it was just after they broke up and stuff. But obviously with two of them being gone now, and I think us having had 50 years to ruminate on the Beatles, those lyrics, now and then it was all because of you, just really speaks. And I think it's just such a perfect, like, it would be so sad if it was just a silly love song. To use something that John said about Paul that wasn't very nice in the 80s.
Yeah.
You know, it's actually quite prophetic and quite profound and just really beautiful and so beautifully recorded. I don't know, it just really got to me, Ryan. Yeah,
I could see why. And again, it's that very specific scenario of one last time when you thought it wasn't going to be possible. Like, it's all encompassing that, like, things that the fan base thought they would never get again, you know? I can't imagine what that would be for me. Like, I've always been stuff that's just kind of happened as it's happened. Like, I was a big Guns N' Roses fan when I was younger, and then they got back together, and by the time they got back together, I was like, I'm actually kind of over it now.
Well,
like,
Chinese Democracy was hot garbage, and they've not recorded since they've all been back in a room, have they?
The thing about Chinese Democracy is, if it would come out for someone else, if it come out from a different band, right, and there wasn't all this anticipation, I think I would have listened to it and been like, this is good. Who is this by?
Album was a decade and a half in the making, though, wasn't it?
14 years, yeah. And it was, and for that build up, no album could live up to that.
Yeah.
It's impossible. But that, because an album isn't meant to be, this quality is going to be really high because of the time it took. An album is meant to be, here's some art, experience it.
Yeah, here's 10 songs we wrote this year.
Exactly. So that's, and again, if it'd come out just, if there was no build up at all and it just come out, it would have been like, these songs are actually pretty good. You would have still had people be like, it's not as good as Paradise City or Welcome to, an Appetite for Destruction. But, at the time, it's like, yeah, it's fine.
Their second album wasn't as good as their first, was it?
Yeah, but their first album came out like at a time when the genre was just starting.
Appetite, I was driving home from London visiting a friend the other day. This was in the summer, it happened a while ago, and I'd been caught in traffic in London for 2 hours, and when I finally got on the open road, I stuck Appetite on and just bombed it home with Appetite blaring out, and it was a great experience. It was so much fun.
Yeah. Appetite's one of the few albums that the non-singles get loads of playtime on like rock stations.
Oh man, like
Mr. Brownstone,
Night Train,
Rocket Queen,
on the Night Train, are fucking great. Yeah, Rocket Queen's a fucking banger.
You can tell we're old. this was decades before we were born.
We've never really talked about music on the podcast, but I'm like a rabid consumer of music, aren't I?
Yeah, I think I used to be into music when I was younger, and I genuinely transitioned to like podcasts. And when you listen to like hour-plus long podcasts, you don't have as much time to just listen to music. So
I still sit and listen to whole albums and get up and flip the record halfway through, kind of thing. Like, I'm still like an active consumer of music, and I love that. I don't know how people who don't listen to a lot of music survive.
I mean, it's different things, isn't it? Different tastes. Like,
no, absolutely.
A lot of people aren't into comic books at all, and I'm like, that's a big part of my life. So I don't know what you're doing.
But yeah, no, I get it, and I could talk for hours about how special and unique music is to humanity, and But this isn't the space for that. This is just, I really wanted to talk about the new Beatles song on the podcast.
Yeah, and you could probably stretch that out to art as a whole, which comic books falls under. So,
but the interesting thing is that this song came out, universally adored, everyone loves it. They gave Peter Jackson £1 million to direct the music video.
Right.
Not very good.
Classic.
So
they should have known from The Hobbit, like he's fallen off a cliff.
But Get Back was very good. Have you watched Get Back yet?
I watched a bit of it, and I was like,
really good, man.
I can see why a Beatles fan would love this so much.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is it. I had the same feeling watching Get Back that I had listening to this song, which was just this outpouring of emotion. Like, oh my God, I'm really getting to see something here that, you know, like a lot of people who were like really big Beatles fans when the Beatles were a thing never got to experience any of this because they're not here anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, I just kind of happen to be a huge Beatles fan 50 years on, and so I get all this extra kit, you know?
I mean, in our lifetimes, the Beatles music will be 100 years old.
Hopefully, yeah.
I mean, yeah. Hopefully.
Providing I don't befall some terrible accident. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But you could say that about anything. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it on. I will put in time codes for people who just want to hear the Beatles stuff.
Yeah.
Which would be weird, but
if you're coming here for your Red Hot Beatles news, there are other places you could get that. So thank you so much for listening. If you want to send us an email, comicliterate@gmail.com. Leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. We do shorts on YouTube. And
what kind of reviews do we want?
5-star reviews, baby.
Exactly.
And I've taken over the mantle. I'm helming our TikTok profile. And so there is more TikTok-y content happening there now. And I would highly recommend you just pop over to the TikTok if you want more Jamie.
That is literally...
If you want more Jamie, if you want to see me in a more raw, unfiltered form, then come over to the TikTok.
The shorts will still be uploaded to TikTok, but you're also going to get a direct injection of Jamie straight into your veins as well.
Jesus Christ, that is not the way. Right, we're ending there.
You're going to cook some Jamie into a spoon.
Oh, don't, no, that's gross. That's disgusting. Oh, no. Bye.
Best ending of an episode
ever. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Goodbye.